On today's episode of Locked On Wild, deadline prices are getting crazy, which probably means it's time to tap out.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we'll take a look at why the Seattle Kraken probably pushed the prices too high for the Minnesota Wild to do anything else at the trade deadline. We'll take a look at a couple of players that have been regularly linked to the Minnesota Wild as well. See what the latest steam is on them. And Jordan Greenway got what in an extension with the Buffalo Sabres? We'll discuss that as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild. And again, we're getting there. Nice step in the right direction. Now, if I could just kick this dang cough, I'd be back to full strength here. So we're getting close. Thank you to everybody for hanging through a couple of rough episodes from a voice perspective. We're also getting very close to the trade deadline. And obviously I want to do a little trade deadline speculation because that's always fun, right? To just kind of look at what's going on throughout the rest of the league. There was a massive trade earlier today that I think will probably reset the market from a price perspective and probably taps the Minnesota Wild out from doing anything else other than the Gustav Nyquist trade, which was already a high enough price, being a 2026 second-round pick. The Tampa Bay Lightning reacquiring Yanni Gourde and acquiring Oliver Bjorkstrand from the Seattle Kraken earlier today. They also receive a 2026 fifth-round pick. So by itself, that's not bad. But listen to what Tampa Bay gave up in order to acquire those two. The Kraken will receive the Tampa Bay Lightning's 2026 first-round pick, 2027 first-round pick, a 2025 second-round pick from the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Michael Eyssimont. All of that for Yanni Gourde, who's going to be likely the third-line center once again for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And Oliver Bjorkstrand, I think, is probably going to be like a middle six, bottom six type depth piece for the Lightning. Those aren't top-of-the-line guys. Those aren't top six players that you are injecting into the mix. It's the Tampa Bay Lightning trying to bolster their depth a little bit, but it's first round picks. And I know with the Tampa Bay Lightning, you're never expecting those picks to be high in the first round, but it's still first round picks. So if this is going to be the going rate, and I already was a little on the hesitant side about doing any more, because of the second round pick it took to get Gustav Nyquist. I'll read you a tweet from Rachel Derry of ESPN. She says, if Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand return multiple first round picks, one would have to imagine Brock Boeser could return a first plus in Vancouver. More on Brock Boeser coming up in a little bit, but that is what we're seeing at this deadline. And it you know what it is? It's a byproduct of there being so many teams in the East that are still in the mix. There are, as we look at the updated standings here, there are only, with the Ottawa Senators occupying wildcard 2 with 67 points, there is only one team that is 10 points out at this point in the season, and that is the Buffalo Sabres. The Pittsburgh Penguins, even with all of their struggles this year, they are currently 24-40, 24-30-10. They have 58 points, so they're still 9 points out, which is a long shot, but Philadelphia Flyers 5 points back. New York Islanders, we'll talk about them in a second. They're 4 points back. Boston 3, Montreal 2, Detroit 1. New York Rangers are in a deadlock with the Ottawa Senators right now. There just are no teams that are currently out of the fight that are willing to make any deals. So all of these general managers are essentially in flux right now, trying to see if their team can, make a little bit of a jump. And the teams that are doing that right now, the Montreal Canadiens, they've won 5 games in a row. But other than that, all the other teams in that wild card fight are on losing streaks. So all these teams are like, why would I sell? Why would I sell if I have a chance to make the playoffs? So your sellers, if we look in the Western Conference, it's a similar situation. The Calgary Flames, currently in Wild Card 2, they have 67 points. Vancouver has 65. St. Louis has 64. Utah has 63. And the other teams were not expected to be in postseason contention this year. Anaheim has 61. Seattle, who we talked about just making the big trade today, they have 56. Nashville at 51. They've made a couple of moves, a couple of sell-off moves themselves. They have 51 points. Then Chicago at 46 and San Jose at 43. So you are limited in the number of teams that are in actual true sell mode, which means that the teams that have players that are available, you can ask for whatever you want. You can say, yeah, you want Yanni Gordon, you want Oliver Bjorkstrand, who, again, depth pieces. Yeah, we'll take multiple first-round picks for those guys. There just aren't a ton of teams that are currently in position to offer up the services of their players. And if you look at the teams in the Western Conference, the Calgary Flames just vaulting into that wild card 2 spot because Vancouver's lost 2 in a row. St. Louis kind of fought their way back in, even though they've made some moves this season. Utah hanging around. Anaheim, Seattle, Nashville, Chicago, San Jose. Those teams continue to win, but they didn't have postseason aspirations this year anyway. So it's a limited field. And you look at the top. Let's look at the top of the mountain too. You've got the Washington Capitals and the Winnipeg Jets, who have been far and away the best 2 teams in the NHL this year. The Capitals score a ton of goals. Winnipeg, has an offense that can kind of match that. So you have to look too at, are you going to be able to catch those teams? Is one move going to put you in position to be able to beat them in a regular in a series? It may not matter if you go up against the Winnipeg Jets, because you could add offense at the deadline. You could add an impact piece, and Connor Hellebuck is just going to be better. He's just going to steal a series for you. And guess what? The Washington Capitals with Logan Thompson, they have a goalie that can do the same. So it's as much about, are you truly out of it at this point? And is a move going to put you in the conversation with the teams that are at the top? Now, the top teams in the East, you've got Toronto, Florida, Tampa Bay in the Atlantic, Washington, Carolina, New Jersey in the Metropolitan, and then Columbus and Ottawa are the 2 wild cards. In the West, Winnipeg, Dallas, Minnesota, Vegas, Edmonton, Los Angeles, and then Colorado and Calgary as the wild cards. if you add one big piece to the Calgary Flames roster, are they going to be in the same vein as Winnipeg? No. If you add a piece to the Dallas Stars, maybe they could be in a similar conversation, but it just feels, again, we talked about this. Every Dayers will remember we talked about this before the season started. You've got the tiers, especially in the Central Division, where it just felt like, Dallas, Colorado, Winnipeg, clearly at the top. And then my ranking was Minnesota and St. Louis are in a similar position, kind of in that next tier. I had Nashville in the top tier. What a mistake that was. But it just felt like there was a clear divider. We've seen as much anytime the Minnesota Wild have gone up against those teams that are above them in the talent pool. It's the depth. It's the depth scoring. It is the depth in the lineup that separates the two. So from a Minnesota Wild perspective, is a big add on the second line going to close the gap? Sure. Will it put you on the same vein? Well, it'll get you closer. That's for sure. But, it depends on who. It depends on who the ad is. And the Wild already going into the deadline have like next to nothing to be able to work with in order to make a move. And you also, as GM of the team, have to show the want to for what it's going to take to make a deal happen, which we'll talk about at the end of the show today as well. But 2 first-round picks for middle of the lineup pieces, it's a lot to give up. So we'll take a look at a couple of players that have obviously been heavily linked to the Minnesota Wild and see what the latest is with both of them. But that is on the way next as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Folks, Major League Baseball getting going. The FanDuel action with Major League Baseball is out of this world because you've got so many live options at your fingertips. You may be feeling a player to go deep in a particular at-bat. You can bet on that. You may be feeling a pitcher to go deep into the game or record a complete game. You can bet on that. You can also bet on the win totals for your team for the entirety of the season. So whether you want that game-by-game action or something a little more long-term that you can track throughout the course of the season, FanDuel has that right at your fingertips. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We are working on trying to do a live trade deadline recap show for you in the afternoon on Friday. So stay tuned, working out the final details on that. Just an opportunity to kind of react to some of the big trades that we see. Teams that don't do much, teams that do. So keep an eye out. We'll give you more details here throughout the day tomorrow as we get closer. But just continuing our trade primer, we're going to call it the trade primer episode. Obviously, on the Minnesota Wild front, we're not expecting that there will be a ton done, as Gustav Nyquist was kind of the big piece. Now, there's potential for there to be other moves made. Obviously, those that have listened to Denny's show on Sunday, he is on the Brock Nelson train And so, there's certainly a possibility that happens. The latest on Brock Nelson from Pierre LeBrun. Brock Nelson's situation is still in flux. No guarantee still that Lou Lamoriello trades him, although that seems to be developing as the most likely option. Minnesota, Winnipeg, New Jersey, Colorado, Toronto, all among the list of teams with interests, but there are others. So here are, if you are on the camp that wants Brock Nelson here in Minnesota, here are a couple of red flags that would not work in the favor of the Minnesota Wild. Number one, current salary cap situation. The Wild are adamant that they are not going to utilize Kirill Kaprizov's cap space on LTIR. If they did, this would be a non-issue. They would be able to go over the cap, but the team is adamant that Kirill Kaprizov will be back before the regular season is over. If you heard on yesterday's episode, and even earlier this week, even on Monday, I am not so optimistic because there just is so much secrecy around it that, I guess I will believe it when I see it when we get to that point. So salary cap, number one. Overall roster, number two. There just are few spots available with the number of players that are injured to be able to fit a Brock Nelson type into the lineup without somebody else coming out of the lineup in order to free up a spot. And this is going to be a big theme of segment 3. Yes, we as the fantasy GMs, it's easy to say, well, just move Marcus Johansson off the roster. Just move Ryan Hartman off the roster. Just move this player off the roster. Bill Guerin has shown zero inkling to do any of that. And so in order for that to happen, there has to be a willingness by the GM to part with one of his guys, one of the guys that he handpicked, one of the guys that he has identified as the core of this team that he has built. So until there is a willingness on that side of the coin, that ain't happening. So those are the two big ones. Now, as far as return goes, obviously the 2 first-round picks that Seattle just picked up would mean that the Islanders could theoretically pick up a haul for Brock Nelson's services. From a draft pick perspective, the Wild are, their cupboard is not empty from a draft pick perspective. They still have next year's first-round pick and 2027's first-round pick. Obviously, they traded this year's first-round pick for David Juracek. So it's not as though they have nothing available. They certainly have plenty of prospects that could be dangled in this type of a situation. So what it would take, I don't think is an issue. It's obviously going to be anything that gets done before or at the deadline is going to be more than anybody would be comfortable giving up. The moment I heard second round pick for Gustav Nyquist, I was like, okay, that's way too rich for my taste. If you're getting somebody who is a top 6 player, it's going to be substantially higher than that. But if the Wild were to do something, they would be able to pay the price asked based on what they have in the system. The other part is if you are in a bidding war with any of those other teams, especially the teams in front of you in the standings, you're not going to win it. If Winnipeg steps in and says, we would like Brock Nelson, and we're willing to offer anything remotely close to what the Minnesota Wild would offer, Brock Nelson's going to Winnipeg. He's going to the Jets. He's going for a chance to win a legitimate Stanley Cup. And Winnipeg has a much better chance of winning that this year than the Minnesota Wild do. It's the same thing if the Colorado Avalanche would come knocking. Brock Nelson, I think, stands a better chance because of Nathan McKinnon, stands a better chance to go to the Cup than the Wild do. That's just the reality of the situation. So if there's a bidding war for his services, you're probably not coming out of it with the player that you're looking for. So this is going to go all the way to Friday on the Brock Nelson front, because as we talked about, the New York Islanders right now, they are just 4 points out of a playoff spot. They're 4-6 in their last 10, but they have won. They did win their most recent game. So I don't know. Does Lou pull the trigger? Does he not? I guess we'll wait and see. On the Brock Boeser front, Randeep Janda of Sportsnet tweeting out earlier today, Brock Boeser on potentially playing his final game for the Canucks. I'm not trying to think about that. I honestly have no idea what's going to happen. Now, this Canucks team has been in a weird spot since they traded JT Miller. JT Miller has more points since he joined the New York Rangers than Elias Pettersson has shots in that same time frame. That is horrendous. So it kind of looks like the Canucks chose poorly as to which player they kept between the two. And it's a Vancouver team. I know they are 2 points out. They were holding on to that second wildcard spot for a minute and now have 4-5-1 in their last 10. They've started to kind of fall out of it. Are they far enough out of it that they take a step back? Well, I guess we'll wait and see. But they are technically 27-33. So 27, 22, and 11. Do you want to be a below 500 team that makes the postseason? Their goal differential is minus 19. Maybe they decide, since Brock Boeser is likely to leave via free agency, maybe they decide that the time is now to get something for him in return. But once again, same thing with Brock Nelson. There is going to be a bidding war for their services. And if you're the Minnesota Wild, you're not going to win a bidding war unless you grossly overpay. And at this point, you got to take a heavy look in the mirror and try to figure out exactly where you're at in your process and exactly how you match up against the teams that you are going against. We're going to finish on that exact topic, because in order for there to be, I think, a hard choice made to better the team, the GM's got to, the GM has to be the one to put that in motion. So we'll discuss that, as well as Jordan Greenway getting a 2-year extension with the Buffalo Sabres. Has his play warranted a significant bump in average salary? Well, I guess we'll find out after this here on Locked On Wild. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we are your team each and every day as well. Let's talk about the Jordan Greenway news right off the bat. Former Minnesota Wild forward and, frankly, enigma, Jordan Greenway, signing a 2-year, $4 million AAV extension with the Buffalo Sabres. Greenway this year has played in a total of 26 games. He has 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 total points, and is a -1 cumulatively on the season. He's shooting 9.4%. He has 32 shots on goal in 26 games, 80 hits, 23 blocks. This coming off of a season in which he had 28 points in 67 games. He was a +11 and had 141 hits and 65 blocks in the 67 games. Now, when he plays a full season, he's a 31-point player, averaging right around 11 goals every 82 games played. I kind of feel like we dodged a little bit of a bullet there by moving on from Greenway at the right time. Because look, Jordan Greenway has come close to playing a full season approximately one time. Now, I take that back. The 2020-2021 year he did as well. But 82 games in 2018, 2019, and then 56 games in the COVID-shortened season, 2020, 2021. But other than that, he's about a 60-game per year player. He played 67 games last year. He's played just 26 this season. And this brings me to kind of this overall point about these types of players. These types of players are great when they play. But if they're not giving you, and I think it's important to acknowledge that just the general wear and tear of the NHL season, players that play the full 82 is not the norm anymore. Guys like Marco Rossi, who have played every game this year, and Matt Boldy as well, that's not the norm. If you can play, I think, in the 70s in terms of games played, I consider that a good number. You know, you're gonna get banged up and you're gonna miss a game here and a game there. But Jordan Greenway with the Minnesota Wild, you know, he had 81 games, then 67, then 56, 62, and then he played 45 games in his final year with the Wild before getting traded, then played 17 with the Sabres down the stretch. So all told there, he played in 67. And Greenway was always kind of the what if. You know, he had the framework, he had the body that it feels like if he would have utilized it fully, he could have been a ferocious player at the NHL level, and he just never has seemingly put it together fully. Still on the search to do that with the Buffalo Sabres, but I'm very comfortable if they want to give him $4 million and the Wild don't have to. No objection from me, Your Honor. I'm perfectly fine with them handing out that money, and maybe we do have a pretty good bargain in Marcus Johansson at $2 million a season. Okay, let's not get carried away. Final little soapbox that I wanted to hop on here to finish off the episode. Bill Guerin said it himself earlier this week. We've talked about it as such, but I think it bears repeating that if the Minnesota Wild are going to do anything between now and the trade deadline, it's going to have to be a dollars for dollars trade. It's going to have to be a good old-fashioned hockey trade where you match the dollars up and you improve the roster somehow by subtracting a piece off of the current roster. That doesn't seem feasible to me because Bill Guerin has not shown any propensity to, or any desire to do that with this current group of players. I think we can all agree there are several spots in this roster that could be upgraded, but they have become GM favorites. They have become the quote unquote good teammates that don't give you a ton other than just the overall presence on the roster. And I'm not trying to suggest that that's not important, but it, like, that second line wing spot, I have been just nauseated at how many times that has had to be brought up. And it just continues to be an open wound on this roster. That is a position that could substantially be upgraded if the desire to do so was there. You know, even your middle six, you could stand to upgrade the middle six by just moving on from one of these guys. But Bill Guerin has not shown the desire to do that at this point. And maybe it's because he himself doesn't believe that this roster is one that is fully ready to contend, but that goes against everything that he's been saying since he put it together. The phrase that Bill Guerin has commonly repeated with this group is, I believe in this team. I believe in this group. I believe in the ability of this group to do what we are all hoping that they will do. Well, there are two choices then. Everybody's got to pick it up, or they're going to need some help. So maybe I get proven wrong. Maybe something happens that was not expected, but I think just based off of what we've seen over the last couple of years, the amount of patience that has been afforded to this group that had a really, really good 2021-2022 season, the amount of patience that has been afforded to this group that has not lived up to that same level of performance is frankly eye-opening. And, we're seeing some of the same things that doomed last year's team and some of the things that have led to early exits in the postseason. We're seeing some of that leak through again this year. And there is something to be said, I think, about a GM treating it like a business as opposed to like how it has been treated. The opportunities to upgrade are out there. It just depends on if you're willing to make the tough decisions and the tough choices. Well, I guess we'll see between now and Friday. But that'll do it for today's episode. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Appreciate everybody for making Locked On Wild part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We got them for you right here on Locked On Wild as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day.